everyone, we're back after about 10 minutes, and I just wanted to show you again the warm water. I forgot to mention that, remember I was talking about the water needs to be like a nice warm bath, you know, stick your finger in, that feels nice and warm, just like yeast would like it. But if you happen to have one of these handy kitchen thermometers, about 110 degrees Fahrenheit is about the right temperature. So if you really want to be accurate and you have one of these, you can try using that. But otherwise, if you don't have it, just put your finger in and make sure it is warm. Okay, not too hot to touch, but it's just like a nice warm bath. Okay, I'm going to go back to showing you the types of yeast again, just up close. This is the instant yeast, which means they've put more live yeast particles in each granule. Okay, so there's more cells, more live yeast cells in each granule. Okay, so instant yeast would be useful because it would activate quicker, so you'll be able to make your bread a little bit faster. You will not need this first process that we would use for the active dry yeast. So see those granules, they're a bit bigger, so less live yeast cells in there. But this is more traditional, because traditionally you have to rehydrate that yeast with the water and sugar. So that's what we're using for our experiment. So let's go to our experiment now. Remember, in number 1 we used yeast, sugar, and boiling water. Okay, so remember I asked you what's going to happen to that yeast when we boil it, and then I also put it into the oven at 350 degrees. You can almost see these dead yeast cells on the side here. And, well, that's probably the sugar actually on the side. But you'll see that it definitely is dissolved. There's no granules left. But is there any action happening here? No bubbling action other than me just lifting the spoon back and forth. So basically, we have killed that yeast. We have killed it. Okay, so we boiled it to heck and heated it up. Next one, number 2, we have yeast, sugar, and then 10 milliliters of salt, which is quite a lot of salt. So dissolving, not very well dissolved, because that salt kind of got in the way. There's a lot of salt in there, and no action, right? No bubbling action. Okay, too much salt. Salt inhibits the yeast action by taking up more of the water. All right, next one. Ooh, look at that bubbly action. That is beautiful, isn't it? Okay, so that's what we want. That is ideal conditions. It's the yeast with sugar, it's food, and warm water. So look at that beautiful bubbling. That is what's going to make your bread nice and light and airy. That's carbon dioxide that it is producing. So remember, the 2 byproducts are alcohol and carbon dioxide. Alcohol is what gives it that lovely flavor and smell, and the carbon dioxide is what gives the bread its lift and airiness. Next one, we have cold water for this one. So there is some action, but not as much. Okay, so the cold water was just too cold. It's actually got more action than probably I predicted, because the water has warmed up to room temperature. Okay, so there's a little bit of action, but definitely not enough to push up on your bread. So if you use cold water, your bread will not be risen as much and be a little bit flatter. Next one, number 5, was yeast and lukewarm water. So we've hydrated the yeast. It is dissolved, just like the last one, it was dissolved, but no action because it has no food. So we've dehydrated this, or we've rehydrated the cell, so it's dissolved, but no food for it, so it's not actually creating any carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And then the last one, yeast, sugar, salt, oil, and water. There's very little action, tiny bit of bubbles. Hard to tell the difference between the bubbles and the oil droplets, but there's a tiny bit of action, not very much at all. It is mostly dissolved. I see a few granules, left on the spoon. There we go, you see them there? So mostly dissolved, but just a few granules. So let's look at those questions you have to do. Okay, so there's some questions like, what is the effect of heat on yeast? So that goes back to the first one. So we will just slowly go back. There's number 5, number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 1. So here's the effect of heat. Is there any action? Basically, you have killed the yeast. Okay? And then the effect of sugar. Sugar is good, right? So we need the sugar for the yeast to feed it. Okay, so that one didn't have anything because there was too much salt. But this one had the best reaction because it had the ideal conditions. It had sugar and warm water. So we need sugar to help the yeast metabolize and produce a gas. So it converts the sugars into alcohol in the fermentation process. It metabolizes that sugar into alcohol and ferments it, and then it produces a gas as a byproduct. Okay. The effect of salt on the yeast is that it slows down gas production. So in number 2, there was too much salt. It slowed it down way too much. Okay. And in number 6, where we did add just a little bit of salt and oil, that slowed down the production a lot. So it can be helpful. So in bread recipes, you do not want to omit the salt because you do want it to slow down the production. You don't want it to get all bubbly like this all at once. Okay. The effect of oil is that it kind of smothers and suffocates the mixture. So what it does, I'm going back down to the last one here that had the oil and the salt. So it had salt to slow down the production, oil that kind of suffocated the yeast. So it does produce a lot less gas. Sometimes this can be beneficial for doughs that you leave overnight because it will produce too much gas if you leave it too long. So you want to control it a little bit more. Okay. Cold water was not warm enough to produce much gas, but as it warms up, it may produce some gas. Okay. And the last thing is, with no sugar, we had no food for the yeast, so it did not produce anything. Okay. So, your last question, I'm going to leave that up to you. Your conclusion is, what was the ideal condition for the yeast and why? There's that ideal one. Okay. All right. Hope you had a good time watching this, and we'll see you later. Okay, just thought I'd show you what happens after 2 hours. The final results after 2 hours. Some of them are actually foamy that weren't before. So number 6 got a little bit foamy. There we go. Number 5, nothing. Nothing there. Number 4, we got a little bit of foam. This is 2 hours, remember. Oh, excellent. Number 3. We knew that was foamy. Number 2, nothing. Nada. And number 1, definitely nothing. Ooh, and one last thing. I've left the samples out for 5 hours now. And I was just about to go and clean it all up when, look, now everything's died down. 5 hours later, even the one that was all nice and foamy is now died down because it's gotten cold. But look at over here. I have to show you this one. This is the one with extra oil. Oops. Sorry for the shakiness. And look at that one. It's actually gotten nice and bubbly now. Okay, I'll show you that. Oh, there's the spoon. Look how bubbly that got. So that one was delayed.